Welcome, mothers and others. Today we are having a very last minute sort of interview with Jay Kleberg. And we're going to tell you guys all about Jay Kleberg, and he's running for Texas General Land Office Commissioner. And we're going to learn all about Jay. So let's get started. So Jay, welcome. We have a large Facebook group. We have 31,000 members from Mothers Against Greg Abbott, and we're so excited to be interviewing you again. We have met you a couple of times already. And since then, our group has grown quite a bit. So some people are going to get to meet you for the first time, and hopefully not the last, and hopefully they'll go into the voting booth this coming week for early voting and give you their vote. So let's go right ahead and just get started. So let's start out with some of the basic questions that you get a lot, and then we're going to go to some of the fun questions, okay?
Let's do it.
So yeah, what does the Texas General Land Office do, and what is their primary role in Texas government?
Great. The General Land Office was established in 1836 to manage our public lands. Today, it's 13 million acres, and it generates about $1.1 billion a year off management of that acreage for public schools. It sends that money to the Permanent School Fund, which is one of the largest educational endowments in the country, to then fund K through 12 education. It oversees the Veterans Land Board, which has 9 veterans homes, 4 veteran cemeteries, and a land, home, and home loan program. Oversees the Alamo and about $8.4 billion in backlogged federal natural disaster relief funds.
Okay, that's great. And now, yeah, the General Land Office does a lot of stuff that I think like everyday Texans don't know what happens there. They probably, think it's just magic. They don't know what the GLO office does. So that's great. Thanks for that information. Can you tell me why you're running for General Land Office Commissioner?
Sure. First of all, this is an independent constitutional office, just like the governor, just like the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the ag commissioner, comptroller. And so when you think about some of the things that I will talk about, we have the power to use this office as a force for good. And I believe that everything that we love about the state of Texas is at risk because this office has really been used as a stepping stone for the last 20 years. I've got 20 years of experience in land conservation, natural resource management work as an entrepreneur, as an environmental advocate, as a filmmaker, as associate director for Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, where I helped raise $100 million for the wild things and wild places of this state. I managed and did a land deal that was the largest land transaction for conservation purposes in Texas history, managed about 30,000 acres on behalf of the state, and actually worked to acquire land from the General Land Office during my tenure there. So I've got a lot of experience and realize that if we want to protect everything that we love about the state of Texas, then we've got to take a leadership role in how we balance the economy and the environment, and that the General Land Office and the Texas Land Commissioner can be that position that actually takes the lead in a low emission future and in a future that we can be proud of to pass on to our children.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. So, you just talked about a lot of your qualifications and especially all of your experience in land management, which is so impressive. So I'm going to go back a little bit because I think that not everybody knows how far back your experience with just working in land goes and land management. So what was it like growing up in the iconic and highly respected King Ranch in Texas?
Yeah, I grew up down in South Texas on the King Ranch. My father managed about 15 million acres of land all over the globe. And so I come to this position in really the last 20 years of experience in land conservation and natural resource management from a long heritage of people who worked alongside those for the benefit of land, water, and wildlife, and that we've been doing that kind of sustainable land management really for a couple hundred years. And so I think that we could use that same kind of vision in how we manage our public lands and how we prepare ourselves for what we're seeing right now, which is climate change and the impacts of December being the hottest December on record. 100,000 acres burned over a three-week period about less than a month ago in all of Texas. So we're seeing the impacts, and we've got the ability to actually invest in combating climate change. And that with my background, having grown up on the King Ranch, that I believe that I'm an expression of that kind of responsible and sustainable land management, and we'll take that kind of vision and background to this office.
That's excellent. So when you talk to people who own ranches and people in rural Texas, like what are you hearing from rural Texans?
That they are seeing the pressures of inflation. They are seeing the pressures of climate change, that they may not give it that name, but they've seen that we've had 500-year hurricanes in the last 6 years, that we've gone through very intense droughts over the last 10 years or so. We've got 100-degree days in most of Texas today, as you and I are talking, that they're concerned about their schools. They're concerned about how they're going to maintain the land that they may have had in their family for over 100 years or more, that they're concerned about how they're going to diversify that revenue stream, and that they're worried about the future for their children. And certainly even in other parts of the state that may not be Houston or Austin or San Antonio, that have plans to be carbon neutral or low emission future by 2030, 2040, that they also are looking to ensure that we have abundant water, that we take care of the land that we do have, that we provide more open space for future generations, and that we're making sure that we have a fully funded public school system. That those are the kind of things that I've enjoyed talking to people about, even though some of those things are pretty heavy, that this is an office that I believe is truly a job, and that it touches things that, regardless of where you are, that it touches something that you care about: land, water, school children, veterans, and preparing ourselves for a more resilient future.
Yeah, that's excellent. I know it's good to hear that also that rural Texas has all these concerns, because these are things that actually are similar concerns also with people in urban areas. So we do have a lot more in common than we think, for sure.
That's right. And I think also, just to add to that, that having this conversation with people in urban and rural areas, ex-urban areas, about the connection between what happens in the Trans-Pecos or the Panhandle or in some of the more rural parts of the state, that the way that we manage that land, private and public, has an impact on our air quality, on water quantity and quality, that the quality of life that we have in urban parts of the state is directly connected to how we manage our rural parts of the state, and support those communities in making sure that they continue to thrive as well.
Yeah, amen. Amen. I know I recently went to Big Bend a couple weeks ago on just a short little trip, and was kind of surprised to see that there are some towns, like small towns and rural towns, that are really thriving. And then there's some that are kind of dying towns. But one of the biggest surprises that kind of came to me there when I was having a conversation with someone was that I said, what is the biggest, hindrance in your life right now? She said to me, my son fell and they thought that he broke his arm, and we had to drive 2.5 hours to go see a radiologist. Mm-hmm. She's like, this just, in rural life, we're working with the farmland, they're working with cattle, they're doing all this stuff, hard labor, and yet they can't really even go to an emergency room because they don't have qualified doctors in the emergency room.
Yeah, this election, in my opinion, not just the land commissioner race, but this election cycle is about healthcare. It's about jobs. It's about ensuring that we have jobs for all Texans in the future. That we don't have the kind of brain drain that we see in some of these rural communities, or even in places like El Paso, where I lived for 8 years. That we make sure that we have quality jobs for everyone, regardless of where they went to school. That we've got good healthcare. That when you look at the General Land Office and its contribution to, or lack of contribution over the years to, the permanent school fund that ultimately gets down into the K through 12 classroom, the stresses that we see on teachers, that we've got to make sure that we have leadership in statewide office at all levels that actually cares about all Texans and is leading and is not concerned about their own power, but they're actually concerned about people.
Yeah, excellent. I agree with that 100%. So we talked a little bit about climate change. So what can you tell us a little bit more about what your plan is, what you would do in your position, and what your plan is to combat climate change if you were elected for Texas General Land Office?
Absolutely. One of the things I think that people don't realize, especially in, let's say, rural parts of the state, more agrarian parts of the state, is that during the freeze, that period of time, if you were a farmer or rancher, that statewide, you lost $600 to $700 million in revenue from that event. And so not being prepared, whether that's ensuring that we secure our grid, and on public lands, what I would make sure is that in all of our standard leases, and that touches permanent school fund lands, it touches parks and wildlife lands, that we ensure that that natural gas infrastructure is winterized, that we have the opportunity to store permanently and safely 700 years worth of Texas industrial carbon emissions in our submerged lands off the Texas coast, that we've got the opportunity to utilize 13 million acres of public lands to sequester carbon in that soil and to generate credits and ultimately generate funds for the permanent school fund. That if you look at the $30 billion that we will invest in what's called the coastal spine to fortify the Texas coastline, that we used climate science to base our infrastructure investments, and not necessarily looking back 100 years of weather patterns, but looking forward to what we will see, so that that infrastructure is not obsolete on arrival. So those are some of the things that we will do to balance the economy, create jobs, expand our energy portfolio. Right now, we're generating a lot of that $1.1 billion from oil and gas royalties, that we expand that beyond just the oil and gas sector, but also into renewables, wind, solar, geothermal, offshore wind, et cetera.
Okay, so that's excellent. So right now, so let me just ask a question. So right now in the permanent school fund, a lot of those monies are coming in from, I guess, oil and gas. So would we be expanding that to also include like wind and solar? A percentage?
Yeah. So if you look at public school funding holistically, we've got about 20% of that budget is reliant upon oil and gas in one way or another. That may be royalties, it may be fuel tax, and that we'll probably see over the next 15 years a decline of that revenue by about 30%. So if you look at the General Land Office and how much it generates each year, $1.1 billion, only 400,000 of that 1.1 billion is from the renewable energy sector, one wind and one solar lease. So we've got a huge opportunity to expand and diversify our revenue sources for the permanent school fund, so that we can prepare for a future where we may have declining revenues on oil and gas royalties.
Okay, that's excellent. That would be great, because we have to think ahead. So you're completely right there. That's really good foresight to have that type of planning. So we did talk about the permanent school fund, and we did kind of minorly talk about the school land board. So let's go right ahead and just talk about what is the permanent school fund, what is the school land board, and what are your plans to use the permanent school fund to better help fund our schools?
So if you look at the permanent school fund, it's the largest K through 12 educational endowment in the country. And if you go back to 1986 to 2018 and look at how that fund grew, it grew from about 13 billion to what is about $50 billion today. So it quadrupled in size. The distributions to our classrooms during that period were, on an inflation adjusted basis, absolutely flat. So we've got to make sure that not only are our contributions to the permanent school fund going to that endowment, which in 2018 alone, because of a lack of investment in the permanent school fund from the general land office in those revenues, we lost out in our classrooms on $700 million in that year alone. And this is an annual budget of K through 12 that's about $50 billion. So that's not insignificant. The legislature this last session created what's called the Permanent School Fund Investment Corporation. And the land commissioner, a GLO appointee, 5 state board of education members, and then 2 that will come from a slate that the state board of education, the general land office, provide to the governor. There'll be 2 other members there, so a 9-person board. They will decide on how those investments are made. And then I will make sure, as Texas Land Commissioner, that we push those funds down to K through 12 classrooms where they belong.
That's excellent. So for anybody who's listening to this, it's really important that we choose wisely who we elect to the state board of education. Okay, so it's super important because they get to vote on things like this that Jay just explained to us. Very important. Yes. So,
and there was a year, I'll just say, you know, the Houston Chronicle reported on this. There was a year where the general land office did not contribute any funds to the permanent school fund. They went around the permanent school fund, gave it to the legislature. The legislature then utilized some of those funds to balance the budget. And then they have more flexibility at that point as to how they can use those funds in schools. And so we've got to make sure that the permanent school fund's initial mission was to fund public school classroom materials. And if you look at it, you talk to a teacher, they will always say, 1, I'm stressed out because of the pandemic, because of the kind of policies that we see pushed down from statewide offices, from the governor's office, et cetera, that they also are paying for their own materials. And we have a $50 billion endowment to help pay for those very things. And so a lot of this is just common sense that we've got to have proper leadership in this position that understands that and that understands what's happening in our classrooms and can benefit and support our teachers.
that would be a huge benefit to teachers. I was really surprised to learn not too long ago when I posted all the school supplies that teachers needed in the Austin area. I did this big teacher gift list, and some of my friends that live in other states like New Hampshire and Massachusetts, they were appalled because they're like, what do you mean? We get this free from our government.
Mhm.
And I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah, they don't do that in Texas. The teachers
Yeah.
really do have to pay for a lot of their supplies. So it is complete mismanagement, it seems.
And the other thing to think about too is we've got rising property taxes. We have a burden on property owners, whether you're a renter or you own a home, on funding public education, and that this is a entity with the General Land Office and the Permanent School Fund that was created in 1836 to help the state fund our children's education. And we are not doing that. We're underfunding it. And so the burden continues to be increasingly on property owners. And so this is an office that, if you care about rising property taxes, can actually have an impact, a positive impact on making sure that the state comes up with the funds and is committing those funds to public education.
Amen. I'm all for that. That would be great. It would just help out, property owners so much because, our property bills have increased so much in this last year here in Texas. It's shocking. And it isn't just in like the cities. It's all over the state. So it isn't just, Austin who gets the big, rise in taxes. It's everywhere.
Can I touch on one more thing related to education?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Tell me.
Something that most people don't understand is that there are several what are called boards for lease, and the Texas Land Commissioner sits on those boards. And there are two that are very important. One is Board for Lease University Lands, and the other is Board for Lease Parks and Wildlife Lands. So any new lease that comes through those two entities has to come through those boards. The Land Commissioner sits on them. So if you think about getting the most out of those leases, whether they're oil and gas or whether they're grazing leases or what have you, that you got to have somebody that's willing to step up, who also has the experience that makes sure that we're getting the best deal for our school children out of those leases, because ultimately those leases go to our universities, they go to our state parks and our public parks. That those leases that we sign not only should be generating revenue, but they also should be balancing that with the environment. And we've got to make sure, one, that we are winterizing our natural gas infrastructure. We can do that through those leases. So it's not just the 13 million acres of permanent school fund land, it's all of our public lands that are impacted by this position. And we can also ensure that we're recycling and reusing water in the oil and gas production process. There are firms that are already doing that voluntarily, that we're capping flaring and that we're preventing venting as well. So there's a lot that this office can do. And if you go back to the last Democrat to hold statewide office was the land commissioner. And that individual, Garry Mauro, held this office under Governor Ann Richards and George W. Bush and was still able to get things done. So if people ever question what this office can actually do, I can stand firm and say that the things that I'm talking about, I know can be done, and that we have to do them if we want to have a better Texas going forward.
So I agree with you 100%. I worked under Garry Mauro at the Texas General Land Office, and he was a great leader. He did a really great job of the stewardship and really helping out like endangered species in Texas. I was involved with wetlands at the time and mapping of the wetlands. So it was super important. Actually, I have a Garry Mauro question for you. So my Garry Mauro question for you was that, so he was, you just mentioned he was the last Democrat to hold the office of General Land Commissioner after running and holding that office for 16 years. Has he given you any advice about, the office, about running for the office and the duties of the office? What has he told you and shared with you?
So he's publicly supported me, and he's been a huge resource. And he actually is the one who suggested early this year, as we were talking about policy positions and what we could do going into a potential second freeze, is that we should ensure that all natural gas infrastructure in the state of Texas on public lands is winterized. It's something that we can do and that we should do. And so that's some of the advice that he's given me. He talked about the fact that he operated this office under two governors, one a Democrat and the other a Republican, and he was still able to get things done, that it really is an independent constitutional office. You do have some of those boards, but the bulk of the funds, 1.1 billion right now in permanent school fund land revenue. You've got the Veterans Land Board, which in part is self-funded by the funds that you generate off permanent school fund lands. You have the natural disaster relief funding, $8.4 billion that's backlogged. So the need to necessarily be connected to the legislature isn't actually there. I mean, obviously you're reporting to the legislature, but he's given me confidence that this is an independent constitutional office and that we can get some things done. And he was really, I'll just say just one more thing. He was just he operated on the margins of what this office could really do as a force for good for Texas. And he established additional programs under the Veterans Land Board. As you said, he worked along the coast. The Adopt a Beach program came through Garry, and making sure that our beaches are open and that they're clean. That continues today. We have an oil spill prevention program that Garry started along the coast. So there's so much that this office can do, and it has been mothballed essentially for at least the last 8 years.
Yeah. So, let's talk about a little bit, since you just mentioned the coastline. I have a question about the coastline. So what should we be doing to protect our land and our beaches along the Texas coastline? It's a really important part of Texas that I don't feel we talk enough about.
Yeah, so many people don't realize that we are a coastal state. They think that we're a state with a coast, but we're actually a coastal state. And so if you look at what we could be doing to ensure that our beaches are open, that they are clean, the funds that we get through a new hotel occupancy tax along the coastline, that's a new source of funding. We get funds out of federal waters, including the National Park Service provides funding. So we've got hundreds of millions of dollars in addition to the 30 billion that we will be investing through a project that's in part the federal government and the state of Texas to fortify Galveston Bay, to ensure that infrastructure and industry and jobs and even places like Corpus that have military installations, you've got hospitals, you have schools, you've got industry, that we are investing in dune replenishment, in shoreline protection. That one of the visions that I have that I share with Jim Blackburn, which I'll actually credit him with this at Rice University, is 1,000 miles of a living shoreline. We could be investing in not just existing green infrastructure, as you said, with wetlands, incentivizing landowners with conservation easements, but also investing in what already has been started in the Corpus area with Hart Research Institute, a oyster reef nursery program. So we can create oyster reefs up and down the coast, 1,000 miles of it, which one would provide for water quality. They would sequester carbon on a very large basis. They would provide habitat for what is the nursery for the Gulf of Mexico. And we would provide storm surge protection as a second line of defense behind the Padre National Shoreline and the islands that we've got up and down the coast from Boca Chica all the way up to Jefferson County. So there's so much that we could be doing. That's 25% of our GDP. It's 25% of our population along the coast, and we should be investing in it.
That's excellent. I had no idea that oysters could do that much good. That is amazing. So I learned something new today, Jay. Thanks. I'm going to go look that up, because now I'm just so curious.
Yeah, and interestingly, the carbon sequestration piece of it, you would think would be in the shells, but it's actually in how they process water, how they filter water, and some of the byproduct of that process. That was something that I didn't know. I just assumed that it was all held in the calcium and in their shells, but we learned that from Dr. Larry McKinney at Hart Research Institute about a month ago.
Okay, that's amazing. That's so amazing. So
can I tell you one more thing? Can I tell you one more?
Tell me anything. Look, absolutely.
I would urge people to look at Baia Grande. So Baia Grande, Cameron County, the largest wetlands restoration project in the country. And it was a partnership between about 80 different organizations, nonprofits, cities and counties. The General Land Office provided some funding and has really rejuvenated that whole area, which was it's the most hypersaline lagoon or bay in the country, if not the world. And that was an example of the good that this office could do along the coastline.
That's so amazing. I know. So when I worked for a short period of time at the Texas General Land Office, I was working with the wetlands project. So I was learning a lot about like threatened and endangered species in Texas. What can you tell me about a few species? It could be one, it could be two that are Texas species that are currently threatened or endangered that we should know.
I'll point out maybe three. So you've got the ocelot, which is down in South Texas. Their northern range used to go all the way up into East Texas and other parts of kind of that latitude along in Texas. And starting in the late 1800s through the early 1900s, we trapped and killed those cats out. And now we've only got about 200 left in South Texas. And so you've got a collaboration between U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and private landowners. It's a cat and a species that we highlighted in our film, Deep in the Heart, which is a feature-length film narrated by Matthew McConaughey that just premiered up here in Dallas on May 12th. That film will be in Texas theaters this summer. I helped to create a TEKS-aligned K-12 curriculum that goes along with it. Ocelot is one of the species that we focus on. That would be available to teachers. It would be available to parents and kids that is associated with the film. Another species that I would highlight that the General Land Office has negatively impacted is the golden cheek warbler. So if you live in Central Texas, you know that a lot of the habitat that we've got has been protected because of black-capped vireo and because of golden cheek warbler. And science yet does not back up the fact that they have recovered. But the General Land Office bought some land north of San Antonio and realized after the fact that they had endangered species habitat. And so rather than moving on, selling the property, putting it into protection, one of the two, they decided to sue the federal government so that they would lift the restrictions on an entire species. And so to me, that is not balancing the economy and the environment. That is a choice that they made, that on the one hand, they're generating funds to educate our school children, but the very environment that they are creating in the process is not one that we should be proud of. And so that's a species that most people, I think, in Central Texas would know.
Okay, great. Yeah, definitely. That's so interesting. We talked also while we're talking about the coast, let's talk about things that happen with climate change along the coast. One of them is hurricanes, of course. So how does the General Land Office help out with hurricane preparedness and planning, but also the distribution of money and rebuilding and the recovery process?
So I've been in Houston off and on for the last, 6 months, but certainly in the last 2 to 3 weeks, talking with Hurricane Harvey survivors, many of which were impacted by what was ultimately about 1 trillion gallons of water that hit Houston and Harris County and other parts of the state. $125 billion in economic damages. 50% of that was in Harris County. And that today, the city of Houston has yet to receive a single dime in Hurricane Harvey disaster relief funding, to the point that Housing and Urban Development declared about a month ago that the General Land Office violated the Civil Rights Act, discriminated against communities of color in denying those funds. You had 200,000 homes impacted, 75% of them uninsured. 17,000 people applied for funding through the General Land Office for what's called Housing and Urban Development, Community Development Block Grant, Disaster Relief Funds. And today, about 280 homes and homeowners have actually received any kind of funding out of 200,000 homes that ultimately were impacted. So the General Land Office manages, in the wake of a presidentially declared natural disaster, they manage funds that come through FEMA and Housing and Urban Development. And as I said before, it's about $8.4 billion backlogged all the way to Hurricane Dolly, which hit the Rio Grande Valley in 2008. So it's taking right now about 4 to 6 years for those funds to get down into the ground to do work to uplift people's lives. And what they are left with right now is they are in the dark and they are underwater. And we've got some plans that we're going to roll out over the next week or so. We're going to do a press conference in Harris County to talk about the fact that we have got to focus on this issue. We've had nobody home in this office for the last 8 years who's dedicated themselves to figuring out the Texas way to do disaster recovery, but also to plan. We've got $4 billion in mitigation funding that has essentially been utilized in rural parts of the state, but hasn't gotten into the ground in Harris County, which again received 50% of the damages. So our plan is to ensure that we're preparing for and planning for these disasters, because we know they're going to happen. If you're the mayor of Houston, you've been hit by a natural disaster every year of your term as mayor. And so we're going to make sure that we're planning for it and that we're working with individuals, nonprofits, organizations, churches from the ground up to design a new way, a Texas way to do natural disaster relief, recovery, and preparedness.
Yes, and with global warming upon us, we are going to see a lot more of these types of storms and droughts and things that are going to impact everybody across the state. So we do need a plan, and we currently don't have one. So, so you said you're going to be rolling out a plan in the next few days, you said?
Yeah, we've got some plans that we'll roll out in the next, between now and May 24th. So awesome. keep your eyes out on social media. We're going to just address this directly, because honestly, it doesn't necessarily mean just hurricanes. You think about wildfires, you think about the freeze, you think about flooding. I'm in Dallas right now. we are seeing more of this. It's becoming more severe and more frequent. And so these are taxpayer dollars that we have sent to the federal government that have been appropriated by Congress. And essentially, we have been sitting on them. And people are literally dying in the process, living in mold infested homes, waiting on funds to repair their homes. And that to me is unconscionable.
It absolutely is unconscionable. You were 100% correct. Okay, so we're going to pivot from there. We're going to talk about something else. And then, okay, I think I know where I'm going to go. Okay, so let's talk about climate change and renewable energy. Now, we have a unique opportunity in Texas to be leaders in renewable energy. And I want to know what your ideas are and what your plan is for renewables.
Great. So 13 million acres of public land, about 7 million acres of that is actually in mineral rights alone. Okay, so no surface rights. But we've got about 700,000 acres, mostly in the Big Bend, that is upland acreage. And we have 4 million acres that is submerged lands from the coastline out 10 miles. So right now, as I mentioned before, we only have one wind and one solar lease on that whole portfolio that's generating about $411,000 a year out of 1.1 billion in revenue. So the opportunity to do a survey of all of our public land assets and look at where could we be utilizing geothermal technology, where could we be installing, as long as it's sited correctly, wind and solar and offshore wind, and even things like kinetic wave energy off the coastline. There's so much I think that we could do if we would just admit the fact that we have a problem, and that problem is climate change, and that it is changing. We have seen it. We should just be preparing for it, because we certainly are not prepared for the moment that we're in right now, and that this is an expansive approach to the energy transition to a low emission future, and that I know that we can do it. We've led the nation in energy production for over a decade. We are number one in wind, we're number two in solar. And so it's not as if we don't have the know-how, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the personnel and the workforce to do it. We just have to pivot and put our minds to it. And I know that we can lead in the low emission future. And if we don't lead, then I think that we'll be left behind as a state and as an economy.
Yeah, that's good. I like your vision there. I agree 100%. So Texas currently is one of the leading polluters in methane and in greenhouse gases. How would we propose combating this problem that we have?
Yes, several ways. So I think with any new lease, what we've got is a standard lease. And as we talked about before, one of the ways that we could be more responsible in our energy production and at the same time combat CO2 and greenhouse emissions is ensure that any new lease has stipulations in it that we are recycling and reusing water. The industry is already doing this, that we are capping flaring, and that we're preventing venting. Venting is the during the process of energy production, releasing methane into the atmosphere. And so we can make sure that operators are doing that in a responsible way. And then if you think about industrial emissions, that we have the opportunity right now to store those in our submerged lands 10,000 feet down, and make sure that we're doing it safely and securely, but that we can take what is the number one CO2 emitter ranking in the nation. That's Texas, the number one CO2 emitter in the nation. And we can start to turn that around. And then other things like carbon sequestration on that 700,000 acres of uplands. And what we talked about with oysters and artificial oyster reefs, that too can actually sequester carbon, and start to turn this around and think about the fact that, you know, we've got a lot of land, we have a tremendous amount of natural resources, and that we've got the infrastructure to do a lot of these things. We just really do need to put our mind to it, and we've got to have leadership that's willing to step up.
That's great. I agree. Can you tell us a little bit more about, not a little bit more, can you tell us a little bit about the Dark Sky Initiative and like what it does, what it just proposes to do, and what do Texans need to know about it?
Sure. There are a few things, and there's one that's related to it. I'll get back to that in a minute. But Dark Sky Initiative, you see out in the Big Bend region. You've seen it with the McDonald's Observatory. The reason why there's an observatory there in the Davis Mountains is because of the dark skies. And what's called the Big Bend Coalition did over the last 2, 3, 4 years is actually work towards with private landowners, with the National Parks Conservation Association, and others to look at that area and really look at our sky as a resource. And that if you think about 83 or so percent of those of us in Texas live in a city, and that you may, if you don't leave that city, you will not see the stars. So we've got to make sure that we protect those areas where we can. And that's part of the Dark Sky Initiative. And the national parks and state parks, there are a number that have been certified as national park or state park dark sky places. The other thing that I would also promote is, this is something that Texas by Nature and a number of other organizations have promoted, is that during the spring migration of migratory birds, that we're turning out our lights, and that we know that residential and commercial lights can mess with the migratory patterns of birds. And so that's something that may not necessarily be in the purview of the General Land Office, but I care about the state. And we've lost about 1 billion birds in the last few decades. And so we've got to make sure that as proper stewards of the state of Texas, that we do everything that we can to ensure that that we conserve it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you're right. We need to keep those dark skies dark, especially for those birds that are migrating. And we could do a lot more in cities too. I mean, we really can, a lot more than we're doing. So we should at least try. Um, I was looking on the General Land Office website, and I was doing a little bit of research for just meeting with you today. And one thing kind of stuck out to me. So I just kind of want to ask you a little bit about it. So let's talk about the Texas Defense Task Force. What are your thoughts and plans for this task force?
Well, to shut it down, the General Land Office has gotten into some areas that are not under its constitutional responsibilities or in the Natural Resources Code. And so I think that those distractions, as we have seen in other parts of our government, are tools to distract us as voters away from the real responsibilities and the failures of leadership to actually do the job. And the way that I talk about this campaign is that it is a job that I'm running for, that I'm qualified to do it. I'm qualified to do it day one. And that all of these interviews and meeting with people all over the state, screenings for endorsements, we have 118 endorsements. Elected officials, folks like Beto O'Rourke, congressmen and women, former elected officials, every major newspaper in the state of Texas, that we are interviewing for this job. And I have done hundreds of interviews. I can't wait to continue to do this. Because it's things like that program that we've got to stop, because it's just a distraction from the actual job at hand.
Hey, good answer. I was wondering because I wasn't really happy when I looked it up, and I just thought, what is this? It was just, I don't know. It didn't seem to fit in with what we need to be focused on at the moment. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like your answer there a whole lot. One thing that we do as Mothers Against Greg Abbott is that we support our veterans. So that's actually one of the roles that is underneath the General Land Office. So what can you tell us about what the Texas Veterans Land Board does? And how does it help our veterans and the families? And do you have any plans or initiatives that you would like to implement if you were elected General Land Office Commissioner? Is there anything that you'd like to implement to help veterans?
So there are 1.5 million veterans in the state of Texas. There are 7,000 of them that are actually taking advantage of the Veterans Land Board programs. To me, that is a failure of the program. It has not been fully staffed for a number of years. You look at the interest rates that we're providing to Texas veterans to acquire homes, land, or do home improvements. They are nearly a percentage point above any other interest rate you can find on the market. And I've heard this from veterans all over the state. So we got to make sure that not only are we creating competitive programs that are beneficial to our Texas veterans, but that we're also staffing up that program so that it's promoting the availability of and the benefits of the program. So that would be number one. Number two, we had during the pandemic, 9 veterans homes had double the death rate due to COVID of any of the long-term care facilities in the state of Texas. Not a few percentage points, double that of nursing care facilities around the state. We've got to ensure that we follow the science, whether that's the science around the pandemic or the science around climate change, because literally people are losing their lives. And that also goes with natural disaster relief funding, that all of these things have consequences, and that specifically with veterans, they have honored us with their service. We should honor them with benefits and with programs that we should all be proud of to provide to them. So that's what I would do. And, you know, we've got the 10th veterans home is going to be built up here in Tarrant County that I would want to look at expanding the veterans home program, at expanding potentially Texas veteran cemeteries at the same time. So there's a lot of work that this can do. And even those Texas veteran cemeteries, some of them are on reimbursement programs with counties. It's about a $7 million a year budget, and it's been underfunded. The associate director or the deputy director for the Veterans Land Board resigned last fall because the chief investment officer for the General Land Office called those veteran cemeteries money losers. That to me, again, is unconscionable and does not reflect the respect that we should have for our Texas veterans.
I agree with you with that. That's just absolutely terrible that they would say something like that. It's just shockingly terrible. Okay, so you produced a couple of documentaries now, The Wall in the River and Deep in the Heart, that's about to come out. Can you tell us a little bit about these two documentaries, just really quick?
Sure. Yeah, real quick. The River on the Wall was an Emmy-nominated film. We won the Best Documentary Film at South by Southwest that year. It was a couple of years ago. We did it, and there were 5 of us on that documentary trip, which we went by horse, bike, and canoe from El Paso to Boca Chica to look at what the potential impacts of a Texas border wall would be. And so we all took a step out from our positions. I was Associate Director for Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation at the time. And took a stand against what that would do to our wildlife, to private lands, to communities along the border, and really, truly what a distraction that physical barrier is and has been. And that the Government Office of Accountability, last time I checked, had no measure that showed the effectiveness of border wall along our 1,200-mile border. So I would, urge people to watch The River and the Wall because I think it'll give you a different perspective on all of that. This next film is truly a love letter to the state of Texas, to our land, water, and wildlife. It's narrated by Matthew McConaughey. It took about 3 years to produce it. It just came out here in Dallas at EarthX Film Festival. It will be in theaters this summer. It'll be streaming later this fall. Created TEKS-aligned K through 12 curriculum, next generation science standards. That will be available for free. We're promoting 20 different nonprofit conservation organizations in the process with a website and with credits. And I, along with 2 others, wrote a book about it. It's about the natural history of Texas. So when I talk about these things and about this job and that I'm ready to do it, I'm not just talking about it. I have dedicated my life to the state of Texas. I have dedicated my life to ensuring that the things that we all hold so dearly, that we can pass those on and that they are improved and that they're better, that this place is better than we left it.
Oh, I love that. I can't wait to see the new movie, Deep in the Heart, a Texas wildlife story. I can't wait to see it. And I hope I get to see it at the IMAX. And that's just, I'm so excited about it because I too love Texas way a ton, so much. I love Texas. So um, I have two very short questions and they're fun ones. Okay. They're
Okay.
really fun and they're not necessarily about the general land office role, but you have now traveled all over Texas running for this position and you've seen all kinds of things in your job in the Texas Parks and Wildlife. You've seen all the different parts of Texas that it has to offer. So if what are, maybe you can name like one or two places where all Texans should go visit another part of Texas before they die? What should we be putting on our bucket list to go visit?
So a couple of places that are really other ends of the state. One would be Franklin Mountains State Park. It's the largest urban park in the nation, and it's right there in the middle of El Paso. I was hiking those mountains about a week ago, actually, last Sunday, and lived there for 8 years and spent a lot of time in those mountains. And I found some new places, and it's beautiful. You can see Mexico, you can see New Mexico, you can see all of El Paso. It's just stunning. The other place that is a little bit harder to get to is Flower Gardens National Marine Sanctuary. It's 100 miles off the Texas coast. So it's not technically in Texas waters, but we claim it. And it's the westernmost coral reef in the Western Hemisphere. And it's only 100 miles off the Texas coast. Obama and that administration expanded it, or started the expansion of it. And it's now about 7 times what it initially was. And what I would talk to people about just generally, and I know you asked me a short question, but just to expand a little bit, is all of these things, Flower Gardens, Franklin Mountains, you look at the Big Thicket, you look at Big Bend National Park, the protection of these places started with private citizens. It started with Texans, and they saw the benefit of protecting these places and then got the state involved, or they got national parks involved, and then it snowball to the point where now we've got these places like Padre Island National Seashore, same thing. And so to think that I could step into that role, carry on that tradition, and protect and conserve some of these beautiful places for future generations, and that everybody also has a chance in this upcoming election to vote for somebody who has that same ethic, that's really important to me.
That's great. Now I have some new places I want to visit. I'm super excited. Okay, so the last story is, can you just tell us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, can you still hear me?
I can hear you. It's
okay.
Kind of
All right.
a little, but it's okay.
I had to go off of my AirPods here.
Okay.
Yeah, so been married to my wife for 17 years, Chrissy, and I have 3 beautiful girls, 14, 9, and 4. And we live in Austin. We've been in Austin for about 10, 11 years now. We moved there for me to go to business school and stayed, got a job with Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. My wife is also on the campaign trail. So the two of us are trying to manage all of this. But the conversation that we had back in the fall was that, and we're seeing this now with Roe v. Wade, with suppression of our vote, with the lack of respect for everyday Texans and investment in communities from the lack of disaster relief funding, all of these things. These are people in the top positions that only care about themselves and about power and truly not about people, that the time that we would be spending away from our children and away from each other was absolutely worth it. And it wasn't just worth it. It was necessary. We have to do this. And I know that you are doing this, you feel it, that the people that are on this Zoom, that they feel it, and that we have got to change the way that we lead in this state. We've got to change the way that we think about ourselves, and we have to become voters. Because if we do that, then I do think that we can change the trajectory of the Lone Star State, but only if we vote. And if we don't do that, then we're going to continue to see the failures that we have really over the last 20 years, and that Republicans own this moment right now. They own inflation, they own high property taxes, they own the fact that we don't have healthcare in our rural communities, they own the fact that we are 45th in K through 12 per pupil spending, They own all of these things. We're the number one CO2 emitter in the nation. We have got to ensure that we elect people in November. I got to get to this runoff first, but we have got to make sure that we have a strong team going into November that can give people from all walks of life, whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, alternatives to the failures and the failure of leadership that we have right now in this state.
Amen. I hear you. I think we all hear you, especially anybody who's watching this call, anybody who is a member of Mothers Against Greg Abbott or is living in the state of Texas and is concerned about what's happening in Texas right now. I think we all hear your cry right there, because you're right. Everything is on the line with this next election, from climate change to women's rights, just the economy, taking care of education, and the basic fundamentals of Mothers Against Greg Abbott is just fighting for Texas families. I mean, we spent years and years of corporations getting all the benefits of Texas while families never get any of the benefits of that. So it's time to change it around,
Yeah, and this is not political speak. Like, you and I are not being bombastic. I was at the Tarrant County Courthouse today with a Bands Off Our Bodies rally there. And there are women and transgender Texans that are the same age as my oldest daughter talking about fearing for their lives and their livelihood and their future because of the state that we live in right now. I've seen it. I've heard it on phone calls with people that may have trans children who are literally worried about living in the state of Texas and are thinking about moving because they fear for their lives. That this is serious and that people have got to wake up and they have got to vote. We have got to get out and vote. As Beto and others say, we are not a red state. We are a non-voting state. And I truly do believe that. We're going to have probably 400,000 people show up in this runoff. So 201,000 people are going to decide who goes to the next round for lieutenant governor, for attorney general, for comptroller, and for land commissioner. And all of our jobs for the last several months has been educating people about what these offices do and the impacts on their lives, because they are real.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We agree with you. We're going to do our best to try to get all of our members and then have our members tell their friends and their family members to go out there and get out the vote and vote for qualified Democrats like yourselves. So thank you so much, Jay. I can't wait to see you again here in Austin, see you on the campaign trail. And we're really excited about all the things that you're proposing that you could do to help out the Texas General Land Office. So
thank you. Can I give you one more plug?
Oh, absolutely. You can tell me anything
so
you want.
If you all will just watch social media over the next few days, we're on a day 4 of a 14-day runoff road trip. And on Monday, I'll start in the Valley. We'll go from Cameron to Hidalgo to Webb. And then we're going to come back up to North Texas. And then we'll go down to Bear. And then we'll be in Harris County, Fort Bend, Travis, and then we'll end up in Williamson. So make sure to check social media. We've got all this stuff on Facebook with events. Check out our website. I've got a lot of the policy that I talked about here is on our website now. And we've got everything about my background, about the office. We're trying to be very serious about this and do something extraordinary. We have raised about $1.5 million for a race that probably maybe Garry would have been one of the last to really raise that kind of money. And we've got over 115 endorsements, because we know that it's going to take something extraordinary to get through the general and win this open seat in November. So I urge people to check all that out. And thank you so much, 1, for what you're doing, and 2, how organized you are, and 3, for shedding some light on this office and my candidacy, because it really is important.
Okay. Well, I hope we do well by you, because we definitely have a plan on how to promote you and just how to get the word out about what you're doing and why you're running for Texas General Land Office. So, um, last thing is, first of all, thank you all so much, and thank you to Chrissy and your family. You guys are great, and thank you so much for your time. What's your website address? So for anybody
Yeah,
who's watching.
JAY4TX.com.
Great. And then besides getting out and vote, how about if people want to volunteer and help out your campaign during the next week for runoffs, how can they do that?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do would be to email Kat, C-A-T, at JAY4TX.com. Kat is our organizing director, and she's deploying thousands of people all over the state. And so this really is going to come down to every single vote. And so I would encourage people to sign up there, or even through our website. We'll get it. We've got to sign up there. And if you like what you hear, you support what I'm doing in my candidacy, I would urge you to tell 10 friends and make sure that they vote. That's the most important thing. And that we've got May 16th to the 20th is early vote, no weekend voting. And then Tuesday, May 24th is the election day.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And just to let everybody on Mothers and Others know, I'm going to put out the links of all the places that we can go and help out, not only Jay, but also Mike Collier and Janet Duffy and Rochelle Garza. So anyways, that'll all be up very soon. So Jay, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all that you've done for us and for taking so much time out of your really busy day to meet with us today. So
this is great.
Great day. We'll see you in Williamson County.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.